How's everybody doing? Who's ready to learn about some prompt engineering today? We got an intimate crowd for this one. So excited to be here. Thank you, Flatiron School. My sister actually taught here as an assistant and did the boot camp for software engineering. A little bit about me. My name is Reubenstone. I am a senior software engineer. Kind of had a crazy journey starting a startup in college. That progressed into me running that company for a couple of years. It was kind of this open source hardware platform, and I learned how to code from my business partner. Kind of was an unfair advantage, but I'm kind of a self-taught coder who was mentored by my first business partner. I worked in product management in the corporate world. I went back into software engineering. I'm currently a senior software engineer. And I've also been working on a very exciting startup project, this micro-learning platform called UpskillHero, which has been a wild ride into the world of learning how to architect prompts and work with AI. And it is relevant to this presentation. I also wrote a fantasy novel that introduces teenagers to coding. And it is relevant because the coding world has actually shifted into needing a new skill, which is English, which is very weird and new. So that's a little bit about me. This is my teammate, Dan Hackworth. He's going to say a little bit about himself.
Hey everyone, excited to be here. My name's Dan Hackworth. I'm the head of community for UpskillHero. I was a graduate of Flatiron School. My teacher's right here. Yeah, I met Steve on LinkedIn, and I was testing for him and just grew from there. So I'm super excited to leave it off to him.
Awesome. So the name of the presentation today is Becoming a Prompt Engineering Rockstar, Unlocking the Fundamentals of Generative AI. So I'm curious, is anybody here have experience with prompt engineering? Okay, a little bit. Just so it's clear, this presentation is going to be the programmatic approach to working with language models. I'm not so interested in typing into the chat box. That's boring. As it says up there, learn, love, code. This is about using code to work with language models. So there is obviously a big technical component to this. So what is prompt engineering? So one definition that we found online is that prompt engineering involves crafting specific instructions for AI systems like large language models, e.g. ChatGPT, to generate accurate and useful responses. The better the prompt, the better the AI's output, but it's important to remember that when we're talking to these large language models, and it's something that's very new to engineering, and to me as a software engineer, there's definitely an art and a science. We don't exactly know what's happening in that black box that is ChatGPT. It's a trillion parameter brain that we don't have an exact science for working with it. So we need to use the right English that we insert into the system to get the right output, which could be anything from name my sock company to write me a 10-page article. So something that I'm kind of passionate about is kind of breaking down the nuances and really understanding what we're doing when we work with a large language model, because there's a lot of buzzwords in the industry, but from my perspective, I think no matter how complicated it gets, we're really only doing two pretty extraordinary things, but everything fits into two buckets, and it's important to see the differences. So the first bucket when we're working with an LLM is natural language processing, NLP. And what does this mean? It means the computer can understand my natural English. It understands what I'm saying. It even understands my semantics, the meaning behind my words, my tone. That's an unbelievable superpower that a computer can do that. But we need to separate that out from the second bucket, which is content generation. So NLP is different than content generation, and it's just important to know what's going on when you're working with these models. Content generation is the fun stuff. It's creating rich content or additional instructions when it comes to more complex applications like agents, based on either simple or sophisticated instructions, right? It's creating English. You could even create art, etc. And I have a really important note here, which I don't really see people talk about nowadays in any of these tutorials or any of the learning materials I see, is that when you're working with these tools, you still need to be a good programmer. You need to understand software architecture. How do you organize your code? How do you put, these systems can get very complex. You need to think about the architecture of your application before you think about how to work with these language models. And I actually am very opinionated. I don't really like the word agent. I'm sure someone will punch me for saying that, but at the end of the day, an agent is just a piece of software architecture, and I don't like that buzzword. I think it trips people up into understanding what's really happening. This thing understands English, and it generates English, period. And that's extraordinary, but don't get caught up in the buzzwords. And I think it's also important, and again, for the goal of this presentation is obviously not to give like a full lesson on prompt engineering. I couldn't do that in 1 hour. It's just to give you some unique angles so you can maybe wrap your head around this better than the average person learning this. Two other nuances that I think are important to recognizing when working with LLMs are just, there's kind of two situations when you're dealing with content generation, simple and complex. So you have a very simple type of prompt where you're asking the AI, can you create a funny name for a toilet paper brand? And maybe you give it one dynamic input. For example, it's going to adjust the name of that toilet paper brand based on the tone or the location of a customer that you're creating this output for. And this, I think, is more like what you're doing when you're typing into a chat box as a non-programmer. You can give it some complex input, but it's still just like, it's usually pretty simple. But the really, 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 really powerful stuff is the complex interaction with these language models, where you can create multi-step instructions where you can have the AI think for you. Like, for example, here's a situation, ChatGPT. Can you think through what the possible scenarios may be? Give me the most likely scenario, then write me an article, then create me a table of contents based on all of these outputs. So that's where the superpowers come from, is understanding how to work with it on the more complex side, because this thing can then do unbelievable amounts of work for you, and it's unbelievably good at it. Again, it is somewhat magic, as long as AI doesn't kill us all. So again, I mentioned this. The fundamentals matter. This is a meme. I don't know if anyone's seen this, but this is like a famous meme for people, like students learning machine learning. Nobody wants to learn math. No one wants to learn programming algorithms. You just want to jump right into the machine learning part of it. It's not going to work. You need to be a very, very strong programmer if you want to be a good prompt engineer. And you need to know how to organize your application. You need to be a good software architect. How you do that? I mean, I'm a big believer in just building harder and harder projects on your own so that you can learn from mistakes and get better at being a software architect. One interesting thing, this kind of just came out, is when you're working with these LLMs, and we're seeing it with our startup, there's a lot of latency, which means that when you ask OpenAI for a response, it could take 10 seconds. It could take 35 seconds for a response. And you need to be able to handle asynchronous programming really well. If you don't know how to await something in JavaScript, and you don't really have a understanding on how to, I'm getting technical here, how to create a custom promise, don't learn prompt engineering yet. Make sure you understand how to do that. So that's the point of that meme. And we're all guilty of that, by the way, sometimes skipping steps. So this is kind of building some intuition if you're a total beginner. If you know this, it's probably very simple for you, but when you're interfacing with any of these large language models, whether it's Gemini, whether it's Copilot, or from any of the big brands, or OpenAI, the premier one, GPT, what are you actually doing? And it's actually pretty friggin' simple what you're asking their API, their interface. And the way I think of it is like a machine where on every API call, so every time you submit a request to OpenAI, you're sliding in a few inputs every time. And the output, again, to build intuition, is always just another chat message from the assistant, which is the AI. And that's This is what's happening behind the scenes when you type into ChatGPT, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? The response is a message from the AI. It's important to get these fundamentals down. So what are you sliding in? So you're sliding in a system prompt, which is, we'll talk about this more, but this is giving instructions to the AI. What is the AI's goal? What's its tone? It's where you set the directions for how the artificial intelligence, the language model, is going to respond to you. And just keep in mind, this goes to OpenAI every single time you make a request. It's stateless for the most part, meaning it doesn't really remember the conversation. You just keep on passing the conversation back to it. You're passing all the messages that the user has already created in the chat, and you're also organizing all the AI responses that GPT has given back. And then you get your output. And this is how I think of it in my mind. You just slide it into a drawer, and then out comes the AI message. I think it's a cool metaphor. So this is the more technical view of this exact same slide. Have any of you looked at, is this familiar to any of you, the OpenAI Quick Start? This is kind of the root of all language model programming. If you understand this slide, you basically have an 80% knowledge of prompt engineering. So it's not that hard to get started with. Really what you're doing is, no matter what language you're using, you're going to OpenAI, you're saying this is the model I want to use, GPT-4o, whichever one you want, and you have this pretty little messages array, which just represents the information you're passing from here. And then you have objects which store the chat message and the role. And the role is whether it was the AI who wrote the message, the human, or you have a very special role which is called the system message, which is the instructions that go back every time so that the AI responds the way you want it to. So I don't know if that came off a little bit complicated, but it's actually, just to reiterate, you're just labeling all the messages in the chat with whether, again, if you think of a chat with somebody, let's say there's 5 messages. You have the human messages, the AI messages. You're just labeling them for the API, and then you're sending them back and getting a new response. So it's very simple, but if you understand this, you'll understand basically all of chat completion and how to work with LLMs. So I was going to take questions, but we'll save that for later. So the system message, this is such an important part of going from good at prompt engineering to becoming a master. Again, it's a little bit confusing because this system message gets passed as a message every time when you call the API, but that's how GPT wants you to do it. So the system message, what is it? In OpenAI's chat completions, the system message plays a key role in guiding the behavior and tone of the AI model. It's the initial message that sets the context for the conversation, defining how the model should respond. This message helps control the assistant's behavior, defining its role and providing instructions how to interact with the user. So it's clear what this is, for example, if you're building a tutoring bot for math students, every time you send back the chat and ask for a response from the AI, the system message is going to say, you're a tutor that always responds in a Socratic style. You never give the student the answer, but always try to ask them the right question to help them learn and think for themselves. So it's unbelievably powerful because this is what's going to shape this thing into basically turn it into Socrates as a tutor. And as you start to play around with this, you're going to see how powerful it is. You're going to get confused in a good way. And I talk about this as an art form. Sometimes one sentence creates a way more powerful bot than something with 10 sentences or a 30-sentence prompt. You just don't know what's going to optimize the bot's performance. That's why it's so much trial and error, but it's a lot of fun to play around with this system message. And in terms of being a prompt engineering rock star, as the name of the presentation says, you want to be a good developer, which means versioning your prompts. When we're building UpskillHero, I have 30 different versions of different prompts, version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because you're constantly changing them to improve their output. So again, organization, that's software architecture. It's so important. And again, that's what I mean by an art form. there are different ways to work with it when you're using English, right? In English, you can put things in different parts of the page and convey the same meaning, but how do you know what's going to optimize the output? You don't. You have to play around with it. Okay, take a deep breath here. I hope I'll let that sink in for 5 seconds. So this is kind of a fun slide, and it kind of turned into an accidental meme. Maybe someone will turn it into a meme soon. So again, I'm showing you here, this is a better example of how you hit the API. You got your system message, you got all of your human chat messages are labeled with their messages, and then these are the AI messages. And this is the chat, right? This is the chat that you're having with the AI. But take a look here. This is so important to really starting to master this. This system message can be dynamic. I don't want to sound too nerdy. It reminds me of like Silicon Valley from HBO. It's not a flat, static message. You can put dynamic information in there based on, like for example, in our app, every user has different guidance specific to their personality and learning goals that goes into our AI character's brains when they respond. So if you want to learn about math, that message is going to be different than a user that wants to learn about art. So what's really cool here is that, okay, the key point I want to make is that you got to be able to dynamically adjust that system message. And that's up to you to be a good engineer and be creative what information you put into that prompt to make it more customized and personalized. But here's the meme that I wanted to show you, a thought experiment. So this is how OpenAI wants you to do it, but good engineers sometimes break the rules, accidentally or intentionally. Now, in the way their docs tell you to do it, so I'm saying a thought experiment. Would you rather insert the chat messages with a system prompt, or would you insert a system prompt with the chat messages? So that's kind of like my meme. And what I mean by that is, who says we even need to pass in any of these messages labeled? What if we just passed in the system prompt, and then we put the messages in the system prompt and formatted it however we wanted to? The point that I'm trying to make is, we don't know exactly how the LLM works behind the scenes. They don't even know how it works, which is very scary. They don't even know how it stores facts, by the way. They say if you ask it what sport Michael Jordan played, they do not know how it gets to basketball. They don't understand how it stores facts. It's wild. So you can just play around with this as long as it receives the information you want and it's valid to the OpenAI interface. What this does is you can pass in so much information into this system message. Like for example, with UpskillHero, that system message could be like 3 pages long that talks about like every single learning situation a user has been in, and then that allows us to customize the micro lessons we create for users in our micro-learning app. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I hope that's clear, because you're going to start to see how weird that is. Because in other forms of engineering and software engineering, you can't bend the rules like that, but you can here with English. Yeah, so here's a quick look at a simple prompt, just to build some intuition. Respond to the conversation as a Socratic tutor. The student is currently focused on math, and those brackets indicate like a dynamic variable. So based on the user, the system prompt is gonna change based on the user in your social networking application or learning app. It's fairly simple though, there's just one variable changing. And I just continue to stress, I'm beating this on the head, you gotta be a good developer to know how to get these variables inserted into these. I mean, it's just a string, so you gotta know what you're doing as a dev. Full stack. Another thing, this is an important point, this is so important. ChatGPT, is anyone aware that GPT, over the past 6 months, it deprecated one of their first endpoints called predict. So you used to either pass in a chat and get a response, or there's many situations where you'll say, wait a second, I don't need this has nothing to do with the chat. Like, for example, how do you ask OpenAI to create a name for your sock brand? That has nothing to do with the chat. But what OpenAI said is that we don't want this predict endpoint, which was like just asking it a question. We want to run everything through chat completions. Really important. So if you want to generate content, like write me a blog article, you're still using the chat interface. Really important. But how do you do that then? You're using just a system message. You're basically sending an empty chat with a system message, write me a blog. That's how all generative AI is working right now. And it's just important for you to understand that because that could trip you up. But it makes sense though, why they do that, because it's pretty easy to do. And here's more of a bad boy, of a beast, of a prompt, and I don't have enough room to show everything, but a complex prompt would be, I am working, I hate using this example, but it's a good one just for learning. I'm running a consulting business and I want to give a client 3 unique business plans based on all sorts of data I have on them, their location, what different stakeholders in the organization think, their personality analytics, you could, whatever you want, you can pass all of that information into a very sophisticated, well-organized system prompt. And then, did I miss this point? There's one really important thing, not yet. There's some other magic here. So the first thing I really want to emphasize, you got to be good at English. You got to know how to write because you have to organize this stuff as it gets more complicated. It's almost like you could be writing a 30-page paper. How do you communicate that well to the AI? Really important. Second thing is, and this is probably the most powerful thing of all, is that I don't know, I'm curious how many of you know this, these language models can respond with a JSON object. Again, I don't want to sound too nerdy for beginners, but what that means is it's not just a text output. It could actually output business plan 1, business plan 2. So it can generate these multi-dimensional outputs in one call, which is just ridiculously powerful. An example with UpskillHero is we can query a chat and have the AI like rank what's the most interesting comment, why is it the most interesting, which index is it, which user said it. So you can get all this rich information from one request. Insane. I wanted to give you a little bit of a bird's eye view into how we're employing AI at UpskillHero. And UpskillHero has been a crazy adventure. Kind of started as this Pokemon Go experience for placing learning tips on the map. And then through tons of user testing, we realized what people really wanted was more of a micro-learning platform that helped people get like highly customized learning paths to help them differentiate themselves in a post-AI world. And we're gonna go live with this next week, and we are looking for testers, but some of the things that we've thought through and have done, just check the time real quick, moving pretty quickly. Just some of the really rich things that we've been able to do with the generative AI. So every time you comment in UpskillHero on a lesson, on somebody else's inspiration post, which is something they find fascinating, we start to compile a pretty sophisticated self-discovery rubric on a user. Again, it's an art form, it's a science, but we start to build out this kind of robust prospectus on somebody. What do they care about in life? What do they think their purpose is? What do they hate learning about? Where are their knowledge gaps? So this unbelievably rich output that continuously updates, that helps us understand the user, which is so cool to see it on the back end. You're like, oh my goodness, like it just read this person's, he once posted something, because he started off as a tester where he was talking about like his passion for like TypeScript, and then the back end rubric was like, this guy really cares about TypeScript. It's just so cool. The ability to customize learning tracks. Tracks have been the hardest single thing to do here because when we're dealing with disparate interests across users, so for example, Dan might be interested in science and art. How does the AI know if it should create a learning track in science or art? So this is the art form and the English ability. How do you give instructions to something to make a judgment call? And that is really fun, but extremely difficult to get right. Personalizing micro lessons. I can talk from experience. I guess it is very valuable to use some of my experience as the engineer behind this. Is what we've had to do is separate out inputs based on priority. So like you have to take these inputs into consideration. It's mandatory GPT versus these are additional inputs that can embellish a lesson. Because when our first versions of these prompts, all the inputs like your life goals, all these self-discovery questions, you were getting weird outputs that weren't directly focused on the track. So it's very tricky to get the right customization depending on the inputs you're putting into these prompts. We also are powering our book characters. I wrote a fantasy book, and they're in the app actually responding as tutors. And we're also been working on something really cool, which is this differentiation algorithm that compares you to other users in the network and gives you like a custom identity so that you're guaranteed to be learning something a little bit different than everybody else. Kind of the whole vision of the app is to inspire people to learn new things, but to also come out of this with a quote-unquote learning resume that's different than everybody else, which we think is important so that AI doesn't fully take over the world and that we're all kind of a little bit different. And that kind of goes into this movement that we're trying to push around Education 2.0, which Flatiron is a part of, which is self-learning and kind of letting your identity come out in the learning process. We'll give you a quick demo of UpskillHero right now, then I'll hand it over to Dan. This is going to be very brief. So very quick, this is a work in progress, but you can kind of see that UpskillHero right now is all focused on designing these unique mini learning curriculums for you that aren't necessarily designed to give you a full education on the topic, but to inspire you to learn more about different areas where we think you have knowledge gaps. So in this case, I'm a beginner interested in robotics, and I've previously answered some questions about my personality, my life story, bringing in some interesting like psychology into it, and the AI decides what learning track am I going to create for this user. So for example, the AI here told us that this track supports the user's goal to expand their skill set into coding for IoT and robotics, starting with Arduino basics. I'm not going to go into everything, but this is the first track for a user, so it's much easier for the AI to know what to create for you. But as the user goes through these lessons, they're going to start to comment, answer questions, express things about their interests, which may be different than I may say, hey, I want to create an ice cream truck with Arduino. And then on the next learning track, our infrastructure is going to have to decide, should I teach them about ice cream or should I teach them about Arduino or should I mix it together? Really hard, but really fascinating problems to solve. And it's getting better and better, and we are here today. We really do want to get some testers, so if you are interested in testing out UpskillHero, please connect with us on LinkedIn or get me after the presentation. One other cool part of this is we are allowing users to share things that they find fascinating about their learning journey on UpskillHero, so like small tidbits of knowledge where they can share, and we also use GPT to help them write these prompts. So if I'm taking a micro lesson on philosophy, I was taking we were testing this on Plato, and they were talking about like his theories of forms, and I'm like, wow, that is so freaking cool, I want to share that with someone else. I can use the AI to highlight that, post it back to the community as did you know that Plato did X, Y, and Z? And then users can tell you if they found that interesting, and that input then gets passed back into the LLM to update your self-discovery rubric, which will then update which lessons you're going to get in the future. So you're interacting with what other users find fascinating, and that will affect your learning journey, which has been really cool. So a lot of awesome things going on here. We really want your help to make this better. We have a whole news feed that's showing you activity from people you're subscribing to and from people within 5 miles of you. And we're really excited to also design this Insights tab, which will help you come up with the strategy for kind of bettering your learning path in a post-AI world.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, no, the demo is really cool. We'll be launching it really, really soon. I'm just amazed at how some of this stuff works. You know, I came in as a tester and tried to help drive some of the early, changes, and was able to kind of really grab on to what, people were thinking, and we were able to kind of come up with this idea of Education 2.0 and how we want to adapt learning and education in this world where, people are writing papers with AI, that's a huge problem in education. There's tons of things that are becoming more obsolete or harder to deal with, and instead of saying, oh, well, this is negative, let's keep trying to keep going the way we have been, let's try to use this new tech and push ourselves further. So Education 2.0 is all about the need for specialization and bringing out your strengths as an individual. So finding those things, those places where you can really shine, and saying, this is the direction. This is a direction you can go in, and you will blow everyone else out of the water. And that's really the bedrock of this whole thing. So yeah, we're looking for testers coming up. Connect with Steve or I on LinkedIn. The UpskillHero has a LinkedIn, and we also put all of our updates of when we're doing more rounds of bringing testers in. We have a Reddit community that we just started really recently to get those testers' feedback. Especially, we want to bring in some people very specialized, that we handpick to really give us some deep feedback. I was one of those people in some of the earlier testing, and I got an internship and then a job, so that was nice. So we're, those testing opportunities really can turn into resume credit. We've had internships. We've had other interns as well. So we're definitely looking out for people who are really dedicated and into it. So being one of these testers will give you access to certain benefits. You get to be a lifetime superhero, which is like our top tier in the app. It comes with some special extra privileges like posting and rating. Oh. So, and a special badge that comes with it on our platform. That's pretty much it. Yeah. So, please meet with us. We'll be here for the evening piece.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. How much time do we have? Enough time. Yeah, we got a little bit. So I might, very quick point, I always advertise my book, but if you are interested in reading my novel, it is pretty cool. It introduces you to code through a fantasy novel. You can get it on Amazon. And UpskillHero kind of stemmed from the Nestomir. It's all part of the same thing. I wanted to go into one more thing. So I had some side notes here, but it's a little too boring. You can see my learning style is also always about kind of getting away from buzzwords. I'm going to freestyle a little bit here before we go into Q&A. One thing you're going to hear a lot about is LangChain, and like LangChain this is the coolest thing ever. Like you're going to think it's it's a very nerdy thing. It's a library that allows you to work with these language models. It's like a wrapper over OpenAI, but it also allows you to kind of orchestrate a much more complex LLM workflow, which really means helping you build these agents. You don't need it unless you want to build an agent. And there's no reason you should necessarily want to build an agent. I think there was some interesting podcast where it's like, go back to the fundamentals of these things, be a master of the NLP and the content generation. You don't need to build a chatbot. Everyone's building chatbots. I don't think it's that interesting at this point. So don't get caught up in LangChain. Use it when you need it, not because someone else told you to use it, period. Just thinking if there's anything else interesting. Yeah, I'm on a panel today about imposter syndrome, but I just have a burning desire to say this, talk to people in the industry that already have the job you're going after, because the things you really need to learn are often just very hard to teach. For example, in a new job that I was starting, I got so tripped up on my SSH agent because I had to authenticate my GitHub requests with SSO. Oh my good. If I took a class on that, it would have saved me a nightmare. So make sure you're talking to the right people. And last thing I'll do is I just want you to see our names because I do want you to connect with us, and then I'll open it up to Q&A. Just how to, yeah. So happy to take any questions. That's what, again, at the end of the day, play around with this stuff. That's the only way you're going to get good at it. Don't watch presentations. No, I'm kidding. And I'll open it up to Q&A now if anyone has any interest. Any questions? Let's see. I was going to say, well, that's my dad, by the way. I think right now, prompt engineering is still a subset of software engineering. You may get some unique roles, and this may be down the road where you're like just being a prompt engineer. I mean, that would almost seems too good to be true, because it's just too fun. I have a feeling for a while it's gonna be a sub-skill of just a developer role. Again, what we're fighting for over a much longer time frame is getting roles more differentiated, but I still think it's more of a requirement for a software developer, which is not the most exciting answer. So go start your own company and use it to do something cooler. Any other? Go. Yeah, the question was, what type of math or mathematics background should you have to be a good prompt engineer? I think it's important to separate out machine learning from prompt engineering, because prompt engineering is still just using the large language models to generate content and to understand your English. I'm a believer you need to know math and be passionate about math to be a good engineer. If you don't like math, I don't know why you're an engineer. Sorry. Very opinionated about that. But it's also because people don't teach it well, so it's not your fault if you don't like it. It's always the teacher's fault, so that's the important point. If you want to understand machine learning, some of the most important math that you really want to get good at, I don't know your math background, is linear algebra. Because people that are studying prompt engineering are probably in an organization that are next to the people doing machine learning and building models. So if you want to build models, you need to learn linear algebra. And linear algebra is fascinating, but that's the type of subject where you really want to play around with where you learn it. Like there's that famous guy on YouTube that has the blue guy is like millions and millions of followers. You need to get a very good intuition on linear algebra because it can be so boring if taught by the wrong person. But if you learn linear algebra and you get excited about it, it's going to make you unbelievably valuable to an organization where they're building like custom models. So that's the best answer I could give. Anybody else? Through my journey, like, because I've been involved in so many startups, everything comes from the requirements of the project. So in our case, where you're building like a micro-learning platform, all the models are so impressive that like they're all going to do a really good job for creating a custom lesson. It's actually cost, that's what I'm looking at. And developer documentation, is it easy to understand? I was reading about, I know like for like math tutoring, for example, some of these things stink at like doing basic like math, which is bizarre, but it's true. So if you have a very custom use case where you know one is better, like for example, one is just gonna be so much better at teaching 10-year-olds how to like add, then that makes sense. But again, it's the project that defines the model. It's not, that's the only way to think about it. Anybody? Yeah, exactly. I mean, from my experience with these LLMs, they're all so ridiculously powerful. If you're trying to build a user experience, a product for a consumer that works, where I don't see risk, whether I'm using Gemini to create my lesson or Llama, for example, where I see risk is actually just building a product that people want to use, which is actually not the AI that's even affecting my choice there. If you're building, yeah, again, something that has a very specific use case where you know one of the models is going to outperform, like math is the best example because I know some of them may actually, like they can't even add like 2 plus 3, then it's clear you got to use a different one. To get like more technical, I've never dealt with like some of the more advanced usages on like, I don't know what it's like to fine tune a Gemini prompt. OpenAI makes it so easy because their docs are great. And again, the output from GPT-4o is so ridiculously good. It's scary. It is scary that I'm just making a product decision not to go into other models yet. I'm just gonna. I would be over optimizing something that doesn't need to be optimized. So that's the best way. That's how I think about it. Yeah.
You mentioned throughout the talk how you use both Gemini and OpenAI. Can you speak to probably a little bit more about like which do you prefer like for dev tools? I know that you're building with OpenAI, but is there?
Oh, that's a good question for dev tools. Yeah, I think it's fairly easy to go into the chats and, maybe you spend one day testing out how Gemini helps you code, spending one day testing out how GPT-4o works, and then the new model's o1. I think you just got to put the time in and organize yourself like anything else and see which one helps you the most as a developer. Yeah, everything is so nuanced, which is kind of what's confusing about education. One thing I've noticed in a new project I was working on during the day is that like enterprise software has a very different requirement than like a personal project because the stacks are so much, they're exponentially more complicated. So again, it's always about the need and just playing around and tinkering. I've noticed like with Claude, like it like types faster and has like prettier font. And like that can make you more inspired to code. I always have noticed though, I am a big GPT-4o person. It always seems to back me up the best. I have some experiences, one of the hardest things I did was back when we were doing more of the game elements with this project, we had some horrible like algorithm we had to build that like plotted out where users were traveling on the map, and 4o did the best job debugging that. So, you learn from your experiences. Anyone else? Looks like that's it. All right, thanks a lot. Thank you.